Hello, folks, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, Phil McKenzie.
Hello.
Or, as I recently learned, more properly, Phil Andrew Callum Jonathan Michael Winthrop McKenzie. Did I get all those right?
100%, yeah, that's all my names.
This guy's got more middle names than a 14-year-old girl at her quinceanera, folks. But we're here talking about some fights. Not as many fights as I would like, to be honest, Phil.
No. You look... Again, this was one... I looked at it from far out.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know why. I thought it was okay. But it's not okay.
Yeah. It's
I just naturally assumed that the era of the UFC cruising on guaranteed numbers for pay-per-views and thus making sure that they were at the contractually minimal amount of fights that needed to be on them. That era has, to be fair, pretty much gone.
Yeah.
And most of the time, the UFC makes sure that they're at least okay nowadays, and sometimes quite stacked. So I was just naturally assuming as this one was coming up, I was like, oh yeah, there's going to be some good stuff on there.
Yeah, they save all the good shit.
It just isn't.
Yeah. They used to just save all the good shit for the pay-per-views. Now it's more of a case of they save fighters with marginal local interest for the non-Apex cards. But that's always been the case too, and still, just to let people know, we've got Israel Adesanya versus Sean Strickland as the main event, which is fine. Jared Cannonier as the backup. Boy, I hope we get to see that one. That's almost as interesting as Sean Strickland.
I mean, it could be a rematch of Jared Cannonier against either of these men.
That's true. That's true.
Cannonier Strickland 2 or Adesanya Cannonier 2.
Fortunately, Israel Adesanya, pretty active and doesn't seem to get injured in training very often, if ever. So, good reason to assume that at least Izzy will be there, which I'm happy about. Yeah, not the fight that everybody was desperate to see from Adesanya next. But Sean was the guy who was available. So that's basically the reason we're getting this, as far as I can tell. And then we've got Tai Tuivasa versus Alexander Volkov in the co-main event. That's fine. It's not a matchup that tanks the card for me, even if I don't give a damn about heavyweights, really. But it is sort of the only other relevant matchup on the card. So that's a problem. This is like a lot of these recent cards. This one looked decidedly less thin with the addition of just one more cool relevant matchup. And in this case, that was Kai Kara-France versus Manel Kape. And that's a good fight that I would have been very happy to see. And that one is now gone. Kai Kara-France had a concussion, I believe, in training and had to withdraw. And he's just been replaced by some guy. And suddenly without that, you're just forced to confront how thin the card really is.
Yeah, with one of the more inexplicable gaps on the card being Jack Della Maddalena, who is fighting next week in Mexico.
Yeah, well, it's actually in Paradise, Nevada, but it is clearly marketed towards the Mexican base because we've got Alexa Grasso, Valentina Shevchenko in the main event, and there's a bunch of other Mexican and Mexican-American and otherwise South American fighters on that card. And, but for some reason, does seem like a weird oversight. Just 1 week later, we get one of the biggest Australian fighters in the sport, and he's not on the Australia card. And it's not like him or Kevin Holland are remotely Mexican. So I don't know. It must have just been a scheduling thing, or...
I think it's because, and this may be why this card is bad, is that apparently Australia takes a lot of the fighters' purse in taxes, or at least, either that or it's just that everyone demands higher pay if they go to Australia because of the the travel requirements and everything, which is all fair enough. And the UFC wasn't willing to cough up, so it's hugely underserved the Australian market. Also, you find yourself thinking, surely Jack Della Maddalena is the A side of the Holland Maddalena match. If one of them is like, I don't want to travel cross Atlantic, why is that something that makes a difference for them for Kevin Holland rather than Jack Della Maddalena?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to the specifics, but you would think Jack Della Maddalena would probably be happy to fight in his homeland, and so. But they didn't want to. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's going on in UFC matchmaking these days. Neither do the matchmakers. But here we are, Looked from a distance, we had this bright patch, and then we're right smack in the middle of it, and it's a card, I guess. Thank God we have Israel Adesanya to talk about. That is at least 1 point of tremendous interest. It is not Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis, which I think is the fight everyone wanted to see, which sounds just absolutely like a batshit matchup that is probably should be very easy to pick, and yet you can't help but get excited thinking about it. Mm-hmm. Instead we get Sean Strickland, who really who was recently just fed like a nobody in what almost seems now like a completely calculated move to give Sean Strickland a win. I don't know. But that's what we've got on the docket. Adesanya versus Strickland. And we may talk a little bit about the co-main event, Tuivasa Volkov, but I think we may end up just sort of folding that into our discussion of last week's big fights, namely Cyril Gane versus Sergey Spivak. Plenty to say about Cyril Gane, as ever, as we continue retconning our evaluation of the skill ceiling in the heavyweight division. And then we're also going to talk, of course, about Rose Namajunas' women's flyweight debut against Manon Fiorot, a very interesting fight. And I have plenty to say about that as well. But first things first, we have a main event. It is technically a pay-per-view. Israel Adesanya versus Sean Strickland.
I guess the main thing for this one has to be, can Izzy make this one not boring? Because
I have a lot to say on this subject. Yeah.
Yeah, because that is my main fear going into this one. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, Israel Adesanya gets a lot of unfair criticism for being a slightly weird guy. But as you said, he has a tremendous schedule for a modern UFC champ in terms of the amount of people that he's fought. He's essentially cleaned out the middleweight division, which is why we're getting these kind of fights. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, he is also the common factor in many people's most boring fights.
Yeah.
Be that like Robert Whittaker to some extent, Marvin Vettori, Jared Cannonier. He's put out some stinkers, or not necessarily again, they're not fights you can massively fault him for. They're not like ones where the fight is boring enough to be in question. Yeah,
I just rewatched his. Did you just say Vettori?
Yeah.
I just rewatched that their rematch, and I was actually pleasantly surprised by how consistent the rate of action was. It wasn't as bad as I remembered. It's just the Romero fight that is dreadful.
Yeah, the Romero fight is really the one.
But there is definitely still this thing where half of Izzy's fights are phenomenal. Like when the man has a good fight, it's really good. Both of the Pereira fights, the first fight with Whittaker, the fight with Kelvin Gastelum, these are all-time awesome fights. These are super thrilling performances. And then with the exception of Yoel Romero, here are the numbers. The guy's had 10 title fights since 2019. That's a lot. Uh-huh. And 4 of them, I would say, have been classics. 6 of them have not been. One was terrible. That was Romero. And the remaining 5 were, I would say, positively mediocre and marked by the feeling of them being often much closer than it seems like they should have been. Whether it's Jared Cannonier or Marvin Vettori, I guess the Paulo Costa fight kind of falls in the middle because it could have easily been one of the mediocre fights, except that Paulo Costa just collapsed. He imploded much more quickly than we thought he would. But if he had had any idea of how to deal with the majority of strikes that he was being dealt, namely low kicks for the most part, then that probably would have been one of the mediocre fights too, based on how Izzy was prosecuting his game plan there. And this is in fact the subject of the article I'm working on. So I have a lot of thoughts about this. Working title, Phil. Give me your thoughts. Bangers and bummers. the two sides of Israel Adesanya.
I mean, considering the Paulo Costa, like the ending of the Paulo Costa fight, and it has at least 2 meanings.
Banging and bumming. This is basically my conclusion. Israel Adesanya is Stephen Thompson.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
He's Wonder Boy. Who I have.
And he is also, as we have said several times, he is Anderson Silva.
And he's Anderson Silva. I think he's almost even a little more Wonder Boy than Anderson, because the thing with Anderson is he got tons and tons of credit for all those years for being an amazing counterpuncher, and he wasn't really much of a counterpuncher. He had the slick defense, but he was really more of like a sharpshooter. You know, you would just get stuck in his range, and he would usually take the initiative and crack you with something you didn't see coming. Izzy, like Stephen Thompson, is more of a counterpuncher. Most of his big moments come on the counter. Most notably, like, he just knocked out Alex Pereira on the counter mid-exchange. He knocked out Robert Whittaker twice on the counter in one fight. Those are his big shots, and that is much the case with Stephen Thompson as well. If you put Stephen Thompson in there with Vicente Luque or a particularly aggressive version of Jorge Masvidal, you get some really compelling fights where he's just being dished a ton of opportunities to counter a relentless attacker. And then if you put him in there with Darren Till or Tyron Woodley, he doesn't really know what to do.
Yep. This is another reason why the Dricus fight was one which people actually wanted to see.
Guaranteed action, right? You know that's going to be a good Izzy
Not necessarily
fight.
Because, unless you're a weirdo, people want Dricus to win. But yeah, it's just that his fighting style is almost guaranteed to have a fun performance where either he would most likely explode or he would draw like something out of some violence out of Adesanya.
Yeah, Izzy would have no choice but to take some of those counter opportunities, the dozens and dozens of counter opportunities that would be given to him every round. Mm-hmm. And so that's Izzy. He's very matchup dependent. And I've been trying to wrap my head around why. Why is it not just that the entertainment factor is so much lower against less aggressive opponents? But why is it that those fights are routinely the ones in which he wins, but it does seem like if something were to go wrong at some point, he might lose some of those fights, right? Mm-hmm. And the Romero fight is just the most extreme example of this, where the margins were so thin. And this is something we've criticized Izzy for many times, but I tried to wrap my head around why. It's like the chicken and egg problem. Is this a stylistic tendency, or is it a technical deficiency? Or is it, a bit of both, one feeding into the other? And one thing that occurred to me, watching basically all of his title fights with this in mind, and I'll borrow one of your terms, Phil, is that Izzy does not have a wedge in his game. He has a jab. He has a good jab. It's very quick, like no telegraph. But that jab does not function as a positional tool. It is just one of many pot shots, much in the same way the low kicks are. It's something that surprises you and does damage from far away.
Yep.
The only time Izzy tends to follow up his jab is when he has an opponent who is right in his grill, like Kelvin Gastelum. A lot of clean 1-2s landed in that fight, but it's just Gastelum is constantly closing into range. He is not using his jab in the way that teammate Alexander Volkanovski does, who is an exceptional range controlling fighter, and does a great job of gradually or subtly improving his position using his jab, or the way that Sean O'Malley uses his jab, which I highlighted in my article about him when he was set to fight Sterling. Very good positional understanding of how to move defensively while maintaining a threat, and it all comes down to that jab. Now, a wedge doesn't have to be a jab, right? It could be your feints, could be your push kicks, could be your level changes. Like, you tell me if I'm...
But Adesanya, I mean, we can say that it is actually his feints, but there's the issue we've also discussed.
That's the thing.
When people don't bite on his feints, that's it.
It's not even just that. People can bite on his feints, but they have to bite with offense.
Yes.
That is the limitation, that he does not have, he's just not particularly comfortable seizing the initiative off of, he has all these techniques that should function as wedges. And to define that term, right, it's basically like, it's something to create a little opening, a crack that's just wide enough that you can pour other things through. I think of it as like, a wedge it gains time. It's an initiative grabbing tool. It gets a little reaction. It draws something out that you can then throw more committed things into. And Izzy has all these tools that could be wedges, but they don't function that way. What he really wants is for an opponent to chase him. And so he can use his head movement. He doesn't do a lot of hand defense at all, I've also noticed. It's all footwork and head movement. That's his defense. And it's because he wants to club people with weird counters when they overextend trying to chase after his head. And so what I think we've seen in Izzy's title reign is that he wants to have more controlled performances. I mean, we talked about this going into the Pereira, the first fight and the rematch, that he really thought he was embodying like the slick, safe, imperturbable defensive champion. And in reality was just allowing these fights to be really, really close and being given a bunch of challengers who he probably could have just completely wiped off the face of the earth, because Izzy he's a puncher. I mean, he is a knockout artist. He can absolutely hurt everyone he fights and get them out of there and win definitively. But the thing is that without that understanding of how to use, say, his jab or his feints, he does not have the ability to keep control of initiative in a fight, and therefore it doesn't have the ability to keep control of his opponent except by staying really, really far away. So that, I think, is what you get in these fights where the opponent is not just heaping opportunities for counters on him, and he doesn't just want to go in there and engage in what he feels are risky exchanges by taking the lead. It leads to a bunch of fights where his first layer of defense is that he's just at kicking range the whole time, and that's it. You just get this like nonstop simmer where maybe the opponent explodes from a bunch of leg kicks, maybe they don't, but that's going to be the vast majority of his offense, because the rest of his offense comes from is a follow-up to the counters that he wants. That's my understanding of Izzy.
Yep, all makes sense to me. So I guess the question is, what does this mean for Sean Strickland?
Yeah.
Because my initial read on this fight is that Sean Strickland is going to give Israel Adesanya counters but he's not going to give him the clean counters that
Yes.
Israel Adesanya really wants.
Yeah.
Which is going to make this fight probably messier than I think it's not going to be one of the kind of Adesanya-esque destructions. It's going to be one of the, it feels like it's destined to be one of the control performances where he wins fairly convincingly and but doesn't actually look. You're constantly constantly have that feeling that he could be doing more.
Yeah.
I think so. Sean Strickland, what's he going to do? He's probably going to come in with his very upright style, which
upright and square.
Which has its own benefits, right? This is, this was largely sort of Jorge Masvidal's approach, particularly back in the day when he was, fighting at lightweight, less so at middleweight at welterweight when he wasn't much taller than everyone and he decided to need to cover range more. But, standing tall means that he's less vulnerable to putting weight on his front leg for low kicks.
Mm-hmm.
It means that he can keep over his feet in order to be able to throw counters in combination.
And it maximizes his reach.
Yeah. And so broadly we can see Strickland kind of walking into range and then being ready to counter the low kicks when they come.
Mm-hmm.
I think the question is really that once he gets into that sort of slice of range that Strickland likes, he still has to cover the last bit of distance.
Yeah.
And this is the point at which he has to actually step forward, put some weight on his lead leg, and lean forward, and then, he can still... he likes to lean back and counter and swat at punches, but this is the point at which he is braced on his front leg, to at least some extent.
Yeah.
So it is easy to see him being counter low kicked in this situation, but also it is easy to see him getting countered. I think he will get his jab countered a bunch, but he is good at swatting punches away on defense. I think, as I said, I don't think they're necessarily going to be super clean counters. Going to be a lot of sort of hand fighting. And he's going to be taking steam off by leaning away and turning away and so on. But yeah, I still do think he's going to be countered in those exchanges, and that he will sort of slowly end up racking up attritional low kick damage and getting hit by punches. And I mean, admittedly, he is one of the few people who you can see having the positional fearlessness to punish Izzy for leaning back himself.
Absolutely, yeah.
Do I think that he will be able to do this? Maybe in spots, but he doesn't have I don't think he has the power to make it count. I don't think, again, going back to the Weidman comparisons, I go back to the Silva comparisons, this is essentially what Weidman did. He pushed him back over his feet, he leaned to get out of the way, and then he decked him. Could Sean Strickland do that to Israel Adesanya? Sure, but, I don't think it would finish him, as he has a remarkable chin amongst many other things.
He does, and it is also, it's not just the power, I think it's just the shot selection. I mean, this is both a positive and a negative for Sean Strickland. He's so jab forward that I think he's going to hit Izzy quite a lot for as long as he's in this fight, and I don't think it is at all unlikely, by the way, that Izzy ends up crippling him with low kicks.
Yeah.
Because, he's got the positioning where he should be able to respond well to them, but people have dished out a lot of low kicks on Strickland. Usually it takes him a while to start checking them when he does, or to start catching them. And, I definitely think Izzy is a really hard kicker. And I think this could just be the first time Sean Strickland really, doesn't realize how big a price he's going to pay for eating a few of these kicks until he's eaten 8 of them and his leg is not functioning anymore. So that doesn't seem like a negligible possibility to me. But for as long as he is able to keep pressing forward, It's the jab that gets through on Adesanya, right? Because the jab, this is why if you're fighting a counterpuncher, you better have a jab, because it's the safe shot. It's the shot that is on target the moment you enter range. It is your longest punch and your easiest and most efficient to throw. And counterpunchers don't want you to jab them a bunch, right? It's difficult to counter jabs. Which is why, and I know I've said this before, but it's why it's very important to have jab counters. Precisely because it is the punch which is most difficult to punish. But that's the shot that gets through on Izzy. Whether it's Marvin Vettori, like, look at their first fight. Yes, it's the takedown that really allows him to dominate the third round of that fight. But that takedown exists. That opportunity is only created because Vettori starts like double and triple jabbing his way in and forcing Izzy to make successively more risky positional decisions as he tries to get his head out of the way. Because as I said, Izzy doesn't like catch or parry jabs, which Strickland does. It's difficult to out-jab Strickland because that's all he does. Really. He loves catching and swatting punches out of the way. Izzy does not really use his hands defensively, except to like sort of frame and try to, by main force, keep the opponent out of range. But having hand defenses, they have their limitations, but they're especially good for stopping jabs. Like a catch or parry is just the best way to stop a jab because it's as quick as the punch that's being fired at you, and it requires as little commitment as the punch that's being fired at you. It leaves you in position to then make a more committal defensive move to whatever follows the jab. And Izzy doesn't really do that. So people in the past, many of them have gotten him badly out of position by leading with the jab. And certainly in their rematch, Robert Whittaker hit him clean with a ton of jabs, which he just didn't see coming. So yeah, I think as long as Strickland is able to weather whatever attritive damage is being dished out, I think he's probably going to hit Izzy quite a lot.
I mean,
but just with jabs, you know, he's not going to finish him with jabs is the problem. The analog is
the analog for someone who stays over their feet and keeps a sort of steady simmering pace going with sort of relatively low power strikes is obviously like Marvin Vettori for Israel Adesanya, as you said. Like, and the rematch much more convincing than the first fight between the two of them, whatever Marvin says.
Yeah.
but also it is notable that like this is going to be close stance. And Strickland, for all that he came up from welterweight, is a good deal taller than Vettori, as far as I'm aware. Like the natural distance of a southpaw versus orthodox fighter is not going to be there because they're going to be standing much closer chest to chest, which makes, as you said, it makes the jab much more present in the matchup. Vettori is quite a jabby southpaw, and he did jab Adesanya a bunch of times, but still couldn't quite get it going, and it's still it still is a less crafty fighter than Strickland.
Yeah. Strickland is, according to Wikipedia, but anyway, an inch taller than Vettori, has 2 extra inches of reach, but as you noted at the top, he stands much taller than Vettori as well, which, as I said, maximizes reach, basically just by creating as straight a line as possible between your shoulder and the opponent's face. More efficient use of that distance. So yeah, he is going to feel a lot taller than someone like Vettori, and he's way more committed to jabbing than Vettori. Like, this was a problem for Vettori. As I said, in the third round of he and Izzy's first fight, after Cordero had berated him enough in the corner, he suddenly started using his jab much more consistently and just pressing it, trying to create openings, and it had an effect. But Vettori is... He is both a very consistent fighter and kind of an inconsistent one, because I don't know. He doesn't have many ideas in his head. And he can, once they get punished, he can sort of be like, he can sort of seem a bit clueless. Strickland, I think.
What?
Strickland.
Marvin Vettori? Are you defaming the intelligence of Marvin Vettori?
I'm sorry. I shouldn't say that. But, Sean Strickland, who clearly is a genius, is just really, really consistent with his jab. It is like 80% of his offense. That is his weapon. And so because of that, yeah, I think he's going to touch Izzy a lot. This does make me think, though, what if Izzy's last fight against Pereira, which we thought was a good performance from both guys, Izzy came in with a recalibrated approach after losing what he thought was the safe fight to Pereira the first time around. He was a lot more aggressive, a lot more willing to press in with combinations and take the fight to Pereira to aggressively take him out of the pressure fight that he was enjoying. What if that's like a sea change for Adesanya? Like maybe he's recognized, is it just Pereira, which seems likely enough, or is it like, is he going to be a little more willing to take the fight to his opponents and get people out of there? Because if this is a fight where Adesanya tries to press forward, he probably wins it a lot more easily, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Strickland ain't much on the back foot.
Yeah, I think that was... Well, I mean, firstly, no, I don't think he's going to do that. He's spent a lot of time... I think anything that he has said about this fight makes me think that it will be that it's going to be as risk-averse as possible, because he's mostly just been like, I know what happened to Luke Rockhold against Michael Bisping. I don't want that to happen to me.
Oh, no.
Rather than just being like, this guy sucks, I'm gonna...
Izzy, are you aware that you are a vastly superior striker to Luke Rockhold with a vastly superior chin? Come on, buddy.
Yeah. But yeah, like you said, on the back foot, Strickland, again, is going to just be moving away and swatting at punches a lot, as we haven't really said, but is definitely there. Strickland does not really have much in the way of footwork.
Yeah.
What he relies on is simply sort of like the Diaz brothers. He relies on how incredibly pocket phobic most MMA fighters are.
Yeah.
To sort of do his work for him, both offensively and defensively, is that he just knows that there's a little circle of space around him where most of his opponents are just going to be absolutely horrified to be there for any like lengthy period of time.
And I would even
so
say
he just walks around after them, trying to get them in it as much as possible.
I would even augment that a little more complementarily by saying that, like the Diaz brothers, like my go-to example for this is always Joe Louis. Please don't sue me, Joe Louis estate. Obviously much better than all three of these men, the Diaz bros and Strickland. But there are fighters who have a positional sense relative to the opponent that doesn't necessarily involve cagecraft or ringcraft.
Yeah.
And I think that is Strickland to an extent. Like, he's pretty good at constantly threatening the center line with that jab. But this usually results in him chasing that angle to the extent that, as you said, he's just walking around the cage. He doesn't, there are sacrifices you have to make in what, threats you're making to the opponent when you're thinking more in terms of, I have to prevent them from getting away. You're going to be more squared up to them. You're going to step out of line of a clean shot. You put them in a position where you can then make those moves. There is a difference between creating an angle on the opponent and denying your opponent from getting an angle into open space. There's a sort of back and forth between these two understandings of footwork and positioning. And Strickland does not have the cagecraft kind of positioning at all. He can penetrate your stance. He can get around your defenses. He can constantly bother you with that jab. But in the process, he is going to let you sneak out to the side and get back to the center of the cage all you want, as long as you are capable of doing that. So,
It's that style built on, thousands of hours of hard sparring kind of thing, is that you get the impression many of those hours of hard sparring were not necessarily in cages or, there's no geographical consistency to them.
Yeah.
So he just has this, spatially formless style.
Right. So, I mean, I think the door is, as in so many of these fights, the door is wide open for Adesanya to just fucking cook Sean Strickland. And I hope he does it. I mean, my understanding of him, which of course can only be based on what I've seen in the past, is that he won't, as you said. But it's right there, man. Like, press Sean Strickland back, put combinations on him, hit him to the body, for God's sake, distract his hand defenses, and, you can knock his ass out. His chin is right there. And he leans back just as much as you do, Izzy. And you're a quicker, more creative striker with a much more diverse range of shots to select from. You can conjure a knockout of your own volition. For sure. But if he doesn't do that, then it seems likely that Strickland is going to land a lot more jabs than Izzy would like, but not be able to leverage that into much else. And otherwise, Izzy is just going to get a lot of opportunities to kind of rack up damage with low kicks and body kicks from long range. So it could be an interesting fight. I mean, in the same way that like the Vettori fights were, like, there is still some interest to be gleaned there from, like, how is Izzy going to let this guy stay in the fight? And I don't know, but it's probably looking like it'll be more on the mediocre side of the Izzy Adesanya, Stephen Thompson, wedgeless fighter spectrum.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it is a weird one in that I can see it being. I could see it being shockingly competitive.
Yeah,
like if Adesanya is really committed to fighting, from outside kicking range and keeps trying to get there, I can see Strickland just chasing him around the cage, jabbing him up like a whole bunch.
Yeah.
I can see a shockingly competitive Gastelum Adesanya type.
Yeah, well, because it's a very unhappy medium, though, because he's going to be getting the pressure and the output, but it won't be nearly as many of the big, wide swings and reaching shots that he wants to counter. That is really the fundamental difficulty of exclusively trying to counter against Strickland's game, is that he's 80% jabs.
Yep.
It's a pretty safe way of putting a pace on somebody. Even given how weird his stance is. I mean, this is why he's so effective at getting out of the way of counters and swatting punches aside, because he does not really overcommit himself. I mean, he does whenever he throws a right hand. He overcommits himself badly. His form is terrible, but he just doesn't throw that shot very often.
Yeah.
It's like Blachowicz, Blachowicz. It's the jabs and the safe long range strikes are most of what you're getting. And then you're banking on being able to punish the one Blocko blitz you get per round. It's not a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I could see it being shockingly competitive. As you said, I could also see Izzy just obliterating him.
He could just nuke him on the counter too, like Pereira did, right? Like,
yeah.
Izzy's a significant puncher. Like I said, he takes people out when he hits them clean. So
yeah, that's the other part of it, is that even if it is shockingly competitive, there is just the fact that Adesanya can just nuke him.
Yeah. Strickland's chin is just on top of a flagpole right in front of you. I mean,
yeah. And even if Adesanya gets hit by Strickland's cleanest punch, it's hard to see him.
Yeah.
Has Strickland finished anyone at middleweight apart from that embarrassing exhaustion TKO against Abus?
Brendan Allen.
Oh, there we go.
He got Brendan Allen out of there. Otherwise, no.
So yeah, you got to pick Izzy, but it could be a real ugly one for him in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah.
It could also just be him thrashing Strickland. It should be him thrashing Strickland.
It should be. I hope he does. I mean, he can do it.
Yeah.
He's capable.
Mm-hmm.
He's proved that more than once. He can fight a little against type, accept a little discomfort, and really put a stamp on Sean Strickland. He should. I mean, it's Sean Strickland, man. Like, he beat a nobody to get this title shot. He only got the title shot because he was available for the date. If I'm Izzy, like, I'm offended by that. Like, this dude doesn't belong in here with me. Make a statement. But, Izzy's, I find, nonetheless, despite all of we said, and that it might not be fun while still perhaps being more competitive than you might suspect, I find myself weirdly compelled by this matchup, mostly because I'm compelled by Izzy. Mm-hmm. And how he's going to deal with this weird, frustrating challenge that Strickland poses everybody who allows him to walk forward. So we'll see. I'm certainly interested in it. I'm always happy to see Israel Adesanya fight. I'm not particularly miffed that he's fighting a nobody. He's, as you said before, he's only got one other actual challenger in the division. So, whatever.
That one is, come on, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Like, a confluence of things have led to Dricus being a title challenger.
But I still desperately...
being super good is not one of them.
I still desperately want to see it. And he may not be super good, but he might also be able to beat Izzy. That's not impossible. Not by a long shot. Yeah. So... and we'll be, with Izzy's schedule, we will be getting that one soon enough. So I'm not too upset about this booking. It remains by far the most interesting fight on the card, just because it's got Israel Adesanya in it. But I think that's about it. And good thing too, because we've spent 40 minutes, but hey, it's fun to talk about Izzy. He's a fascinating figure. Let's take a break. When we come back, maybe we'll talk about Tuivasa Volkov. I don't really give a shit, to be honest. I would kind of rather talk about Gon Spivak.
Maybe we could talk about it a bit. There's not much to say, is there?
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see how much we have to say about that before moving on to last week's main event after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Phil, you have insisted because you have a lot to say about this UFC 293 co-main event, so lay it on me. Tai Tuivasa, Alexander Volkov. Fight of the century.
Yeah. I mean, it should be okay. I think the main thing is Tuivasa had sort of a rough start in his time in the UFC. Actually, he had like a bunch of meme KOs, and then he went on had like a rough streak of losses, and then he went on a streak of wins again. Now he's back on a streak of losses. Mm-hmm. And I guess the main question is, did he get better at any point during this time?
Yeah.
Or is this simply like a kill or be killed puncher just going out there and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and it just happens to coincide with like
opponents who
rather than him being like someone who goes win-loss, he just goes like, he just coincidentally manages to get like three in a row, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's B. It's the second one.
It kind of is, isn't it?
Yep. I don't think he's really changed much at all. You can point to a couple things that maybe emerge in certain fights. You're like, oh, he used his jab this time or whatever. But no, he's still, if somebody manages to wrestle him, he still just falls down. Most of his big KOs, or at least many of them, come in the midst of him getting nearly finished himself. He's getting beaten up by Derek Lewis. He got staggered instantly by Greg Hardy before knocking both of those men out. My opinion of him was well crystallized by the time we got into his Derek Lewis fight, and it has not changed since. It's like, oh, he's just going to have the fight Derek Lewis wants to have, and he might lose it, he might win it.
He can throw low kicks. That was why I picked him in that fight. I was like, he's going to throw low kicks, and then Derek Lewis is going to be like, low kicks! As he always is when anyone does anything
that isn't punching.
Like MMA-y, yes. like this is the most unfair shit anyone has ever tried to pull, and he's like genuinely offended.
Yeah, and the low kicks are one of them. The jab, sometimes a body jab, like these are things that Tai Tuivasa seems to think of going into a fight. Usually they are not that durable. The fight starts to get crazy and he turns into swing and counter man. And you got to give him some credit. He's pretty good at swinging and countering in the pocket. He's better than most. You know, he throws reasonably tight punches. He puts them together in combination. Got a good left hook, good straight right hand. But he is completely committed to landing those shots and can be absolutely clubbered in the midst of throwing them. He's dangerous, basically dangerous, but vulnerable. That is Tai Tuivasa.
Yep. And I think, the main thing here is, like, how shot is Alexander Volkov after fighting people who are not very good last couple of fights. Mm-hmm. And I guess Volkov he still looks pretty much like Volkov. He's still super foot slow, but he's really tall. So it doesn't matter all that much because he's just a big tall person and he can keep a pace and he's actually sort of okay everywhere.
Yeah. He's had some flat performances, which make you think like, he's starting to fall off the cliff. And then, he comes back and you're like, oh, never mind. I guess he was just fighting someone who was really fast.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the common factor, right? Somebody who's really fast or has some really keen tactical edge, like Curtis Blades with the wrestling. Cyril Gahn, fast. Tom Aspinall, fast and wrestling. Otherwise, he just comes back from each of these losses against somebody who doesn't have one of those qualities, and he just looks like Volkov. Big, tall guy, pretty consistent output, uses his jab to set up lots of combinations, good right hand, good right uppercut. Will just sort of slowly drown you in volume if you can't keep up a pace and keep him on the back foot.
Yeah, I was thinking, I think of him as being like an aggressive, as having a kind of aggressive, clinchy wrestling game, but does he?
Not really.
He's
got a clinchy striking game sometimes. He's tall, so, grab your head, bang knee, bang uppercut.
Yeah, because that's the one thing that would make me like super confident in this if he'd shown any semblance of a takedown game. Because all it takes is Junior Dos Santos's offensive wrestling to be able to get.
Honestly,
to be able to get Tai Tuivasa out of there.
And with his size,
all you really have to do is try.
And with his size, my God, can you imagine if he mounted Tai Tuivasa? He would demolish him with strikes. Maybe. I mean, that's certainly, if I were in Volkov's camp, I'd be like, let's try like an inside trip. Just try to crash in and trip him. And see if he's still as clumsy a defensive wrestler as ever, because probably he is. Nothing else has changed.
He did sort of take Marcin Tybura down, but this was largely like Tybura tried a really bad takedown, and then Volkov pushed him over onto his back.
Yeah. Usually you have to kind of bring that clinch fight to Volkov, I think. Otherwise, he's quite good at maintaining his ideal range, especially when he's coming forward. I mean, I don't know. This just feels like a bit of a toss-up where naturally the longer it goes on, the less chance Tuivasa is going to have.
I'll probably pick Volkov to finish him because, Tuivasa is just...
Mm-hmm.
He's not Mark Hunt, as we've said many times before.
Yeah, and most people do not knock Volkov out. I mean, granted, Tuivasa hits as hard as Derek Lewis, I think. But you run that Derek Lewis fight back, probably Volkov wins, right? Like, he was winning the entire time. He's usually very durable. You have to really overextend yourself to reach him most times, just because he starts and is effective from so far away. And he does work the body a bit too, which is something in his favor. He can do some of those Cyril Gane front kicks to the body and stuff like that. I think he could probably weather the early storm and beat Tuivasa.
Yep.
Okay, well, on the subject of the bad division, Cyril Gane, who we really talked about last week, sort of like in the context of what it means to be a good heavyweight. And I'm very glad that I succeeded in talking us both out of thinking that because we'd seen him exposed for being just a heavyweight, did not mean that he was not going to continue thrashing other heavyweights. That is precisely what happened. He completely fucking mollywopped Sergey Spivak.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, because I was really thinking, like, oh, Sergey Spivak, you know, he can wrestle, he can do the wrestle, and then you're like, no, he can't.
No, he can't.
Yeah. And then I looked at the tape and I was like, oh shit, Connor's really right, isn't he?
They knew it too in commentary. All the terms they used in promoting this and during the fight, the words they used to describe Spivak's wrestling, he's a really creative takedown artist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that means he doesn't do good takedowns. I know what I know what you're trying to pull. It means he tries some bullshit and it works because his opponents are also heavyweights. But Cyril Gane is a special heavyweight. He's a tremendous athlete. He's very, very fast. And even getting to a clinch position is going to be a massive struggle for Spivak. That was my feeling going in. That is exactly how it played out.
Yeah, I think I saw a friend of the show, Ben Cohn, on Twitter actually posting a very interesting thread, which I completely forgot to retweet, about how people like Spivak should take lessons from Eric Spicely.
Mm.
And I was like, yeah, that's very true. Because this was he was basically saying, this is what happens when you are completely athletically outgunned. You have like a grappling edge, is that you have to just try everything to get the fight to the ground. This is your only chance. And yeah, Spivak did seem to have just come in there with the understanding that eventually the clinch would come to him.
Yep.
And then he would be able to take Gane down. And all he had to do was be big and tough and survive for a while. And then the fight would just naturally come to his area and he would win.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, he got torched.
Terrible understanding of what a Cyril Gane fight looks like.
Mm-hmm.
This man is not going to give you the clinch. Say all the, lob all the critiques you want at Cyril Gane, and I've got some. We'll get to them. But the guy knows his range. At least he knows where he's effective, and he moves a lot.
Yes, it took John Jones making him uncomfortable on the feet.
Yeah.
By landing a couple of punches on him from ranges he didn't expect that caused him to go for the CM Punk punch.
And pressuring him. Jones pressured him. He spent that entire 40-second sequence just inching forward and making Gane uncomfortable. And therefore was in range to immediately seize that clinch when the big punch was thrown at him. But he had to manufacture that opportunity. It wasn't out there in the ether waiting for him to take it. And Spivak's, I think you're right. His game plan was essentially nonsensical. He just thought Gane was just going to lose the fight. Cause he didn't really press in and try to create any clinches. He needed to. I mean, it would have been a horrible, messy attempt to enter the clinch, but whatever. Otherwise, you're just going to lose. So just run at him. Throw a bunch of stupid, ugly... Do what Jasmine Jasudavicius did in her last fight. I can't remember who she was fighting. I'll look that up. But if you remember that fight at all, she ran forward just throwing punches, and 80% of them didn't land at all. Didn't matter. She's a great clinch fighter and a great top position grappler. It was Miranda Maverick that she fought, and she just ran at her. She just kept her on the end of her shots until her ass hit the fence, and then she dragged her into her world. It was just rude pressure. And she recognized that's what she needed. Here's this really quick, athletic fighter who's comfortable at this long range. I am just going to pour shit on their face and blind them so that I can get to my game. And it worked brilliantly. It was a great performance from Jasuda Vicious. That was Spivak's only chance of winning.
Yes.
And,
or his chance, or that Garn was going to have such a low-paced fight that he could eventually just, wander into clinch situations anyway. But, to his credit, Garn actually upped his pace when he realized what Spivak was doing.
Yeah.
Worked the body a ton, built up just a massive attritional damage.
That is something to praise Garn for. His strike selection in this fight was better than it has been in the past. The body punching was a relatively new addition, at least in that quantity. And it was really effective. I loved that. He found a lot more ways to do work off of the threat created by his jab. The body punches were huge. And hey, he learned something,
Yeah. I mean, admittedly, this was on a fully passive opponent after a certain point, but, it's MMA more than that. It's heavyweight MMA,
Yeah.
We've seen famously Alistair Overeem had a tremendous second career built on the fact that he just put the earmuffs on by the cage whenever he got hurt.
Yeah.
And people would just run up to him and just punch furiously into his forearms until they were gassed.
God, that
and
Roy
they would
Nelson.
be like, what the hell happened?
That Roy Nelson fight. Just looking bemused as he just bounces overhand right after overhand right off of Overeem's guard. Like, they're not getting through?
Something in the way.
No angle change, no target change, not even using the other hand. That's heavyweight. Yeah, if you got a heavy bag in front of you, you hit the whole damn heavy bag. That's what Gane did. But from that metric, I think it was a really nice performance from Cyril Gane, which led to a Cyril Gane finishing sequence. And I know you, you enjoyed that, Phil.
Yeah, it was the fact that he's built up this entire attritional finishing performance. This is how you break down a tough opponent who's just doing one thing, kind of. And he's just it's going all, building up all the way to the finish, and then suddenly he gets right to the finish line, and he's just blah, Donkey Kong punches, and just goes absolutely nuts like he always does. Just flailing away, trying to punch the back of the guy's head, and I don't even, why does he still do this?
I don't know. He just doesn't. It's because his feet get planted. Once he goes into finishing mode, he can't adjust his position. So all he gets is this unchanging target in front of him. And he's his way of finding more ways around their last desperate defense is to just throw increasingly stupid punches to try to bypass their guard. So you get the brainstem hammer fists. I mean, I was sort of gratified to see that more people broadly are noticing this about Cyril Gane. I saw a lot of people not in the sort of annoying MMA nerd community necessarily being like, why does Gane turn into such a bad striker when he's trying to finish somebody? This is propagating. So people are taking note that there is really some pretty hard limits on Cyril Gane, master kickboxer. But yeah, this was so typical of Gane's finishing. It was such a really beautiful offensive performance up to that point.
I know.
More than usual.
It's like watching someone who's tries to run foot races, like someone from the Ministry of Silly Walks in Monty Python, and their teams carefully coach them out of it, and then they've run an entire marathon, and then right in the last 100 meters they just start flailing and bouncing from foot to foot and just running down the street in the most stupid way possible. He just can't stop it. He just can't stop himself.
A master carpenter doing this beautiful carving on a table leg. All of these wonderful inlays and this sort of frieze sculpture. And then all right, time to finish it off. And they just take a belt sander, just have a smooth surface. just take it all off right at the end. I don't know. I will say, just before we move on, that even in this utterly one-sided performance, the problems I was talking about with Cyril Gane's footwork were still shown up a couple times. There were some instances early on where Spivak mustered the will to throw a combination, and Gane still has this thing. I talked about this in the very short Jones fight, where he looks like he's in perfect control. He's got his jab between, him and you. There's this just barrier of range that is being enforced. And then he decides he wants to reset, and he just goes for it and just completely gives up the angle to step in and hit him. He clearly has this it is internalized to his game that he is just fast enough to do whatever he wants when he's at range. These are things that in a better division, more people would punish him for. That he's just he's at range, he's jabbing you, now he wants to change angle, what does he do? He sort of squares up or turns away and just steps to the side. And there were 2 instances where Spivak just pursued him with more than one punch, one of which was straight, and he just speared Gane on the end of one of those shots. I think he caught him with a jab on the reset at one point, and at one point with a 1-2-3 where the left hook just completely surprised Cyril Gane. Because he's like, well, I can do whatever I want, I'm fast. And he was just not in position to do anything about the punch coming at him. So he looks subtle because he's at heavyweight.
Yeah.
But he's not actually subtle. He's just fast. And, like I said, given his fight, given his range and a completely passive opponent, I think this was probably his best range striking performance. Really liked the combinations, really liked the way he took advantage of every opening. But it wouldn't have been possible if Sergey Spivak didn't know what the fuck he was trying to do.
That is the problem with Gane, is that there's so few opponents who are even going to be able to test him.
Yeah.
Because he just, he's just big and athletic and has elements of a skill base.
Yeah. Apparently he has said outright that he does not want to fight Tom Aspinall. I found that curious. I don't know if that's true or not.
Lame.
Yeah, that's super lame, right? Your reaction to, anyone who tries to wrestle, who's also big and strong is going to get to wrestle me, is to just be like, okay, I'm not going to fight those guys. I hope that's not true. Well,
who else is there in the division?
Who else is there?
And to fight.
I say that I would very much like to see Tom Aspinall beat him. Tom Aspinall, who we will also have to continually remind ourselves is only good because he's a heavyweight. But what I would really like to see is Gane versus Sergey Pavlovich, and Pavlovich just runs after him with a bunch of stupid bombs and lands because Gane is immediately out of position.
Yep. A man who has his entire fighting style built around how Cyril Gane finishes fights.
Yes. Yeah. He is just running in.
Cyril Gane in finishing mode the whole time.
That's a very funny way to think about him. And a much harder hitter, too. So, it really works.
Mm-hmm. But but realistically, there's almost no one else that Cyril Gane can fight. Because, Stipe, he's going to retire.
Yep.
Pretty sure. Curtis Blades? Come on.
He doesn't want to fight. That was the other name that I was at least told that he mentioned. He doesn't want to fight Aspinall, and he doesn't want to fight Blades. I wonder why.
This leaves him with no one else to fight.
Yeah, who else is there?
There's no one else. A Jailton Almeida.
Also,
yeah?
There's no way he wants to fight him.
Right?
No way.
Basically, other than that, it's either rematches, or he has to go all the way down to fight Marcin Tybura, who I'm sure he would love to fight.
Absolutely, yeah.
A relatively small, slow, heavyweight in the Sergey Spivak mold.
Yep. So coming up soon, a heavyweight fight night main event. Number 1 ranked Cyril Gane versus number 14, Marcos Rogerio de Lima. Coming at you.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know who the hell else he could fight.
Nope.
It's going to have to be Aspinall or Blades.
It does, yeah. All
right, well, that's it on Gane Spivak. But we had another very interesting fight on this card, the co-main event, women's flyweight fight. In fact, the women's flyweight debut of former strawweight champion Rose Namajunas. She took on Manon Fiorot. I thought this was a really compelling and interesting fight, and we are going to talk about that after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. Rose Namajunas made her move up to women's 125 to take on Manon Fiorot. And a bunch of people, Phil, we didn't acknowledge this or I think even know it. A bunch of people pointed out after last week's episode that Rose was not with Trevor Whitman for this fight.
Yeah, I didn't know.
Yeah, she clarified. Apparently, it's not like a permanent break in their relationship. I guess she said she didn't want to step on Gaethje's last camp, basically, when her training camp for this started, and then I guess Whitman is immediately after that is in the middle of the process of moving gyms. So it was apparently just a timing thing that she's not no longer working with Whitman, but just wasn't for this camp. It didn't look to me like a fighter who has made some kind of radical change in her training or has moved away from the things she's learned under Whitman. She looked like Rose. And really something that can't be ignored from this fight is that I actually thought Rose was looking pretty dialed in. Certainly did not look to be troubled by the fact that she was facing a southpaw, which is something we were concerned about. And then she just got the pinky finger on her right hand absolutely destroyed in the first round. Have you seen the images of her hand?
Yes, unfortunately I have.
Yeah. Her pinky is going in about 5 different directions from the one that it should be. So that's a serious hand injury that she picked up very early in the fight. Super unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I tend to all of these times when someone, namely Composer, will be like, here is the most disgusting MMA injury you've ever seen. Warning, it's incredibly gross. I'm scrolling straight past that shit. I don't have the more morbid curiosity. But yeah, with the Rose thing, I just saw it in a picture and I was like, oh, nasty.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I thought this was one of those fights where I was actually pretty impressed with both women.
Me too. Mm-hmm.
I thought, is it Fior? Is that how you pronounce it?
Fiorot.
I thought it was Fiorot, but it sounds like people have been pronouncing it in a weird way. I'm wondering whether they're right and I'm wrong.
There's silent letters at the ends of French words, but the vowel followed by a T. I'm pretty sure it's not.
I know.
It's not Detective Poirot. It's Poirot.
Yeah, I'm sure I've heard people calling her Fior or something weird. Anyway, yes,
I think
Fiorot.
that's wrong, but I'm not. I'm just going to keep calling her Manon Fiorot.
Yeah, that is also what I thought her name was. But yeah, I thought she did a really good job of establishing her jab as a wedge. Often tricky in the open stance matchup. But that is sort of her thing, but I thought the sort of throwaway volume that she used, mixing up the jab and the hook, and sort of using that to build into her offense. I thought she did a really good job of this. She had good distance control. And yeah, I just thought it was I didn't really see before this fight what people were seeing in Manon Fiorot. I just thought she was big and tough and she had a functional punching game. But I thought, yeah, in terms of control of the distance, in terms of working a fairly crafty lead hand, and then when she thought that Rose wasn't ready for that lead hand, like throwing in like the rear kick, not so much the rear hand, but like also like using the jab to build into the 1-1-2 and the 1-2 in a way which, say, like, you know, Adesanya doesn't. I thought it was all good stuff. I thought she had a really good account of herself.
Mm-hmm. No, she's solid. I mean, this was a fight where all of my criticisms of Fiorot's performance are really very quibbling, because I would have liked to see her sort of expanding on all the success she was having. Like, I thought a body jab and a left straight to the body would have been very effective, especially later in the fight when Rose was committing super hard to pressuring, trying to get back in the fight. But her very basic, like 1-2-3, 1-2-3, 1-1, 1-3, 2-3, 1-2. This is the Manon Fiorot game. And usually she mixes in a lot of the sidekick. This was largely a boxing performance from her. And there wasn't really a need for her to... This is why it's a quibbling critique. There wasn't really a need for her to go beyond that, because these are not... She's not Marvin Vettori. Like, these weapons are considered. They are... She is out there actually, like, picking her shots. She's looking at what openings are being created, as you said, using this lead hand as a wedge. She's drawing reactions out. She's following up on it in like 3 or 4 different ways. And it was very effective. I mean, she's just a solid boxer for MMA.
Yeah, I will say, I do think that shelving of the sidekick was a good idea.
Yeah, me too.
I don't know why, whether it was like something they specifically had decided on, whether she was just like, oh, I'm having a good time with the hands. But like, I think that the Namajunas team might have specifically prepared for that, because like the one time she threw it, she got instantly countered.
Yep, and it wasn't like a knockdown, but she did get dropped, just firing a kick, for sure. And probably if I had to guess, I'd say they probably looked at Rose's fight with Michelle Waterson, where she also found some devastating counters to Waterson. You know, the sidekick is it's a strike that sort of requires you to overextend yourself.
Yeah.
And if it misses completely, if you whiff on it, you are going to be in a critically dangerous position as a result.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't know if it may have been a considered choice like that. It may have just been that Rose was constantly pressing into boxing range, but I think it worked well that she just stuck to the hands for the most part in this fight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on the other hand, despite that sort of performance and being, as we both sort of said, like, having that good building kind of performance over the first 2 rounds, she kind of got figured out in round 3 by a one-handed Rose Namajunas.
Yeah,
which
a little bit.
Not really the best. Not really the best look either.
Yeah, a little bit.
As I said, like, I think like her baseline level of like technical skill and approach was like higher than I expected it to be. But it was also like in the 3rd round she became a lot more passive, and I just felt like, I mean, Rose, for her part, I didn't really feel like Rose did a good job of building off her own jab, but she was just finding like the singular counters with it in that 3rd round that just threw Fiorot off her game, and she was just like, well, I guess I'm already winning. Better just close up shop. Like, particularly like Rose just throwing the up jab underneath Fiorot's own jab just started dinging her up. And and she was just like, well, I guess I should just stop engaging, which was maybe not the best look. But overall, I thought it was just like a pretty solid performance. And yeah, I mean, for Rose, I was, it was again like one of these puzzling paradoxes about her as a fighter, is that, you can look at her as a fast starter or a mentally fragile fighter, and then in this one, she has a bad injury in the first.
Mm-hmm.
He's up against pretty much if not the biggest and strongest, one of the biggest and strongest people that she's fought. And then just like kind of gets it done in the, really puts together like a gutsy, well-considered performance in the third, using her like one remaining weapon.
Yeah, I don't know. This isn't typically the kind of style matchup that we have seen break Rose, to be fair. That's kind of why we reconfigured our expectations based on the fact that Fiora was probably not going to leverage her size in the way that usually makes Rose miserable.
Yep.
This was more like, like that Yin Jacek fight. Another one in which, you can say that it was marked by Rose like starting hot and kind of fading in each successive round, but certainly not one where she backed down from what was a very fast-paced and difficult fight. Rose is scrappy, and I was very pleased to see her looking scrappy here. And it is unfortunate because I do feel like a lot of it probably comes down to that gruesome hand injury. That she was really just mostly a one-handed fighter after about the 3-minute mark of the fight. And so yeah, she was able to find counters. She was able to press forward, and but she just wasn't able to build beyond really the first layer.
My fears for Namajunas are mostly assuaged, as they often have been.
Yeah, right.
I guess is that anything you had to say about is she gonna put on stinky fights now, or is she gonna get just run out of the cage by a big person? Is this a stupid idea? None of that seems to really be the case.
No,
it just seems to be just an unfortunate confluence of things which happened. It was her opponent had I think a shockingly good performance, and she had a really unfortunate injury, but she toughed it out, and I'm happy. I hope the one thing I hope she stays at flyweight.
I was going to say the same thing. Fiora said gave a comment after the fight that she was like, I don't think this is a division for Rose. And that's not how it felt to me. I felt like she was looking quite good. She got injured and she hung super tough. It's not at all unusual for a fighter to not be at their very best in their first fight in a new weight class. Mm-hmm. Certainly a Rose with both hands working looked more than fast and powerful enough. Obviously I think that there's probably a bit of a difference. Rose really could shock people out of their games with her punches as strawweight in a way that it seems maybe she can't here. But I think it's also
she did sit down Fiora with a couple of flash knockdowns.
Yeah, mostly they were balanced things. I think where she just kind of the one she caught Fiora throwing a kick, and she popped back up and looked unhurt. I think the last one, the one very near the end of the fight, was a little bit more of a legit knockdown. But even then, it was
even then it was they were both flash.
Fiora was
knockdown.
In the midst of winding up, throwing a big hook, and swung herself off balance because she got interrupted. But I think a little adjustment necessary maybe, but she didn't look physically overwhelmed by Fiora. It's just that perhaps she was herself a little less physically overwhelming.
As we mentioned, she's been a beneficiary of someone who is both big and fast for her weight class.
Right. Yeah. And
not necessarily big, but certainly long.
Yeah, certainly long, tall, and very fast. And now she's just going to have the speed.
And it's still to be honest, a pretty average reach.
Yeah.
Flyweight.
Oh yeah, she's not small for a flyweight. She still doesn't. She certainly didn't look thick and strong compared to Fiora, but she didn't look way too short to be fighting her at all. It was comparable. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'm glad you said the thing about Fiora getting figured out a little bit too. I thought this was, despite everything, a relatively clear but still pretty close fight. Mm-hmm. Where, Fiora's lack of creativity, I think, came back to bite her a bit as Rose just insisted more and more on coming forward, on chasing her down. Fiora has this thing where she has two modes of footwork. There's the footwork that comes off the jab, which is like, little adjustment steps. And then she has the big loping footwork, which is just to buy herself some time and create a reset on her terms.
Yeah.
A little bit like what we saw from Max Holloway the other weekend against Korean Zombie. I thought that, Max has those two modes as well, and it's why at certain points Zombie was able to just chase him out of the pocket and make him look like, Alexander Hernandez or something. But then when Korean Zombie was just in the pocket the whole time, Max had to use the good footwork. He had to stay behind his jab. He had to keep that threat active and take much smaller steps, or else he would just get run over. And it not only made it harder to run him over, but much more effective in punishing the Zombie in those final sequences. I'm not sure that Furo has that gear. What this fight said to me is that if somebody just really, really pressures her, they're going to get her to look a bit like Edson Barboza.
Yeah, I think, she turns at an angle to her opponent way.
Yeah.
It's the kind of footwork that guys like Johnny Hendricks and the Falmer Josh Emmett used to
the Falmer, okay, yeah.
Yeah. Those are the kind of that's the kind of football done. Away at an angle to the opponent.
Yeah.
And then they would just sprint after them and then just absolutely deck them.
Yeah.
And that is at least partially what happened to Furo in at least one of those knockdowns.
Yeah.
She's just she's suddenly transferred into escape mode and she just gets punched in the face.
It is committal footwork is the problem with it. Mm-hmm. It sacrifices flexibility. So when somebody insists on giving chase, you put yourself in a position where all you can do really is keep being chased because you have already committed yourself to these big inertia carrying movements. You have a lot of momentum. You're not settled. It's really hard to suddenly settle down when you're in the midst of being chased and go back to little adjustment steps. And it's especially hard because by committing to this purely defensive footwork, you're not in position to threaten the opponent back. So you can't, by hook or by crook, you can't settle down as long as they keep chasing you. You have to completely get out of the box, and reset. And, I've been thinking about this a lot since, writing that piece about Sean O'Malley, the idea that like chess, Phil,
of course.
It is a zero-sum game, right? And in a chess game, because every move, especially, like pawn moves and such, but every move on a chessboard, as in a fight, creates an opening, which can be exploited. Everything is a compromise. And so, just as in a fight, the best moves are always going to be those which combine offense and defense. And so the best defensive moves are, and this is how I applied it to Sean O'Malley, talking about his pivot jabs. These are evasive moves which must be respected, right? Whereas Manon Fiorot's evasive footwork is the movement version of just throwing up a high guard. Yes, that may stop a lot of stuff from getting through, but in no way does it disinvite the opponent from trying to get through. Quite the opposite. It incentivizes further attacks because you have committed yourself exclusively to defense. And any defense can be gotten around, with enough opportunities. So that's something I'd like to see different from Furo, going forward. I'm not sure that many people in this division are going to be able to trouble her the way Namajunas did, but certainly somebody like Alexa Grasso probably could. And
sure.
If she's in there against a Grasso who pressures as hard as she did against Shevchenko, she is going to find herself in long sequences of her just trying harder and harder to get away, and just the opponent just doesn't respect that, because why should they? She's running. I'm going to chase her. So that's one small critique, but still I think a very solid performance. And Furo really showed off the the well-roundedness of her otherwise pretty simple boxing game. That there's a small variety of punches, but a bunch of different configurations in which she throws them. She's a southpaw with a super active jab. That's a huge thing right there in her favor. And good pace, too. I mean, this was a pretty torrid pace in this fight, and I do think she was a little tired at the end. I think that was part of it, too, but she didn't look like she couldn't keep fighting.
No, I think she was just mentally a bit.
Mental fatigue. You're right.
Running low rather than like physical. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. Other than that, one thing I wanted to say about this card is that the crowd was fantastic.
They were.
Really brought home why it is fun to go go on the road with the UFC once again.
Absolutely. Paris crowd was rabid. Especially, I enjoyed the part where the camera cut to Tom Aspinall and they booed him like he was single-handedly responsible for Agincourt.
Hell yeah.
They just instantly, every Frenchman in the audience just booed Tom Aspinall. It's like he hasn't done anything to deserve this other than being English in France.
I mean, to be fair, everyone hates the English.
So yeah.
Where do you think America gets it from?
Really, really elevated the card. You are absolutely correct. The live experience made it a lot more fun. And there were some other highlights on here as well. I mean, maybe we can spin together a little bonus here to talk about some of these. I don't know, but I would like to talk about Morgan Charrier. That guy's good. And this was like a coming out performance from him, from a guy who has always clearly been good, but as Zane said, maybe has a bit of young veteran syndrome. And man, did he absolutely beat the shit out of the Italian guy he was fighting. So yeah, fun card for what it was.
Also thought, Benoit Saint-Denis also looks like he's a ton of fun. It was one of those ones where it was a bit like the times when people go thankfully people have stopped doing this now, where they're like, no one does this to Neil Magny. I'm like, yeah, they do.
Yeah.
It was like, no one does this to Thiago Moises. And I was like, this did happen just a big violent dude did fuck him up pretty badly quite recently.
This is, in fact, the thing people do to Thiago Moises.
Yeah. Wow, no one does. Yeah. I remember Joel Alvarez doing this quicker.
Yeah.
But Saint-Denis is very, very fun.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's wrap up there. It's going to be a pretty long episode, but I'm glad we spent the time we did talking about Izzy. And we will hopefully have... I mean, that's the thing. Like with the Cyril Gane fight here, I feel like even if it is a disappointing Izzy performance, one of the mediocre ones, that will still give us plenty to talk about. That is the fascination with him as a fighter, is that he's not super easy to pin down. And there's a whole bunch of factors going into why he fights the way he does, why sometimes it's great and why sometimes it's kind of sucks, but isn't usually actually that bad, but sometimes it is. Anyway, we will be back next week to talk about Adesanya Strickland in retrospect. In addition, we will have the opportunity to preview a shockingly good fight night card. I say that now. We'll see what happens. But Alexa Grasso is rematching Valentina Shevchenko on a fight night card for the women's flyweight title. When is the last time that happened? So, that'll be a fun one to talk about as well. Next week's episode should be good. I hope that every single one of you who is listening to this is here to join us for that. You better be. And until then, well, first of all, the Twitter, Evil Greg Jackson, that's Phil, Boxing Bush, that's me. Okay, that's the rest of the outro. If you came here today for the Finer Points of Face Punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.